Hi, I'm Noah Marlowe, and I'm giving this week's National Board Dvar Torah. So this week's Parsha is Vayachi, and Vayachi is the last Parsha of the book of Bereshit, and it has a lot of interesting aspects to it. However, I want to analyze the beginning. The beginning of the Parsha starts as follows: Vayachi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim, Sheva Esrei Shana, and Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. Vayachi Yemei Yaakov Shnei Chayav, Sheva Shanim ve'arba'im me'at Shana. And the years of Yaakov's life was 147 years. So there are a few problems that arise from the first pasuk. Why does it say Vayachi? Why not use a word such as Vayahi? Why does it use a word that means and he lived as opposed to and it was the years of his life? So that's our first question. The second question is, why does it tell us that Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years? We could do the math. We could calculate how long Yaakov was in Egypt. Why does it specifically say 17? And then the third and final question is, why does it in the second part of the pasuk have such a strange order to the years of Yaakov's life? Why does it say Sheva and then Arba'im and then Me'at? Why does it say 7 and then 40 and then 100? So I want to tell you a story. There were once two men, Carter and Edward, and Carter was a mechanic. He always wanted to be a history professor. He was very knowledgeable, but he unfortunately was struck by an unexpected pregnancy, and he was unable to finish college. Now, Edward, on the other hand, was an owner of several hospitals, and he was very rich. He was a billionaire. And one day, Edward and Carter meet in the hospital when Edward and Carter are both simultaneously diagnosed with cancer. And after hanging out with each other and meeting each other and talking, one day Carter decides that he wants to make a list of things that he's going to do when he leaves the hospital, when he's finally healthy, when he recovers. He makes this list and is very excited about it, and so is Edward. And the next day, the doctor comes in and speaks to Carter, and Carter is told that he has less than a year to live. And he takes that list and he crumples it in his hand and he throws it on the floor. And just like any good friend, Edward takes that list and he brings it back to Carter and he says, "Carter, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do all the things that you have on this list." And Carter says, "No, I don't feel up to doing it." And Edward says, "Yes, you're gonna do it. I'm gonna pay for it. And you're gonna have an amazing time." And so Carter reluctantly agrees, and they go off and they have incredible adventures. They fly, they travel the world, they see the pyramids of Egypt. They race cars. They jump out of airplanes. And in their final trip, they make it to Hong Kong, and they have some sort of falling out, and they return. And when they return, Carter he has a seizure, and it's bad. And Edward makes it to the hospital to visit Carter, and Carter is booked for surgery. And it turns out that the cancer that Carter had actually moved to his brain. And Carter and Edward are talking, and Edward says, "I've had a great time." And Carter says to him, "Edward, the last 3 months have been the greatest 3 months of my life. I've never lived so much before in my life." And together, they shared a great laugh, and they crossed another thing off the list. And Carter goes to Edward and said, "Edward, I want you to finish the list for me." And Edward says, I can't. It's both of us." And Carter says, "No, I want you to do this for me. I want you to do this as my last will." And he says, "Okay." And Carter goes into the surgery, to the surgery, and he doesn't come back out. And Edward is asked to speak at Carter's eulogy, and he gracefully accepts it. And at the eulogy, he says, I've been alive for X amount of years, but the last 3 months with Carter have been the most incredible years of my life, and I've really lived, and it's an absolute honor to be able to eulogize him. So what's the connection to the story? Well, Yaakov had the exact same situation. Yaakov was plagued by many different problems within his life. His favorite wife passes away. His favorite child's apparently killed by animals. His second favorite child is almost brought into slavery in Egypt. He has to leave his home in the land of Canaan and move to Egypt. And he's faced with all of these issues. But in the last 17 years of his life, Yaakov moves to Mitzrayim and he has Yosef. He has his son with him. And the reason that the Torah says Vayachi and not Vihi is because those 17 years Yaakov lived. The beginning of his life, Yaakov was unable to do that because he had all these stresses, he had all these challenges and all of these things that didn't allow him to live his life. But in those last 17 years, he really used them to his advantage and he lived. And the reason why it says 47 as opposed to 47 then 40 then 100 as opposed to 147 is to emphasize those 47 years were the greatest years of Yaakov's life. So what's the message from this story? That sometimes we get too caught up in things. We're busy doing college applications. We're up all night studying for a test. And sometimes we just need to sit back, lay back, and live little. Shabbat Shalom.